You might think the universe is mostly quiet, big empty space, things sitting there unless something pushes them. That idea is completely wrong. Nothing is sitting still. Not atoms, not you, not the galaxy, not even the vacuum between things. If you could somehow freeze the universe and look closely enough, you would not find rest anywhere. You would find rotation, swirl, spin, tiny, furious motion hiding under the illusion of calm. And here's the shocking part. This isn't an accident. This isn't chaos. This isn't because something bumped into something else. Spin is built into reality. Let me show you why. One, stillness is an illusion. Let's begin with the most common mistake people make about the universe. It's so common that almost no one questions it. They assume that rest is natural. They think things are supposed to be still unless something interferes. A push, a force, a disturbance. In their minds, motion is the exception. Stillness is the default. That idea feels obvious. It feels reasonable. And it is completely false. The only reason you believe in stillness is because your senses are badly designed for understanding reality. Your eyes evolved to avoid predators and find food, not to measure what matter is actually doing. Take a book on a table. You say it's still. You're confident about it. You could swear in court that nothing is happening. But what you really mean is that nothing is happening at the scale you can perceive. Inside that book, atoms are vibrating continuously, not gently, not occasionally, violently. Every atom is shaking because temperature is not some vague idea. It is motion. If the book has any temperature above absolute zero, its atoms cannot stop moving. Electrons are not sitting politely around nuclei like planets around a sun. They exist as restless probability clouds, constantly fluctuating, constantly changing. The nucleus itself is not calm either. Protons and neutrons are buzzing with internal energy, bound together by forces that are anything but quiet. And this is not rare behavior. This is normal. This is what matter does when it exists. Now you might say, fine, but what if we cool it down completely? Good question. Physicists ask that too. As you approach absolute zero, motion decreases. Vibrations slow. Energies drop. But something very strange happens. Motion never reaches zero. No matter how clever you are, no matter how advanced your technology becomes, there is always residual motion left. This is not a technical limitation. It's a law of nature. Quantum mechanics forbids perfect stillness. If a particle had exactly zero motion, it would have a perfectly defined position and momentum at the same time. Nature refuses to allow that level of certainty. The universe does not tolerate absolute precision. So even in the coldest imaginable state, matter still jitters. It trembles because it has to, not because it wants to, because the rules demand it. That means stillness is not just rare, it is impossible. When you say something is at rest, what you're actually saying is something much more embarrassing. I cannot detect its motion. You are confusing your limitations with reality, and this confusion runs deep. We build furniture assuming stability. We build buildings assuming stillness. We build philosophies assuming permanence. But all of that rests on a misunderstanding. Everything you touch is a storm of motion that happens to average out in a way that feels solid. Solidity itself is not calm. It's pressure balanced against pressure. Motion constrained by motion. Forces locked in a tense negotiation that never ends. Nothing is frozen. Nothing is settled. Even the space between things is not empty. Quantum fields fluctuate. Virtual particles appear and disappear. Energy ripples through what you insist on calling nothing. The universe is not a collection of objects sitting in space. It is activity pretending to be objects. And the pretending is convincing because your brain prefers stability. It evolved to survive, not to tell the truth. This is why the idea of stillness feels comforting. Stillness implies control. It implies predictability. It implies that things can stop changing if only we hold them tightly enough. But reality doesn't work that way. Change is not something that happens to the universe. Change is what the universe is doing when you're not looking closely enough. So when you say, "This is at rest," physics quietly translates that sentence into something more accurate. The motion is happening at scales or speeds I'm ignoring. The universe never signed a contract agreeing to appear simple to you. It doesn't care that motion makes you uncomfortable. It doesn't care that you want a stable reference point. It doesn't care that you build language around fixed nouns instead of flowing verbs. Reality is busy, constantly, relentlessly. Stillness is a story you tell yourself so you can function. And that story works well enough for daily life. It helps you stack books and pour coffee and walk across a room without panicking. But it fails completely as a description of how things actually are. The moment you look closer, stillness collapses. And once you really understand that, something unsettling follows. If nothing is ever truly still, then motion is not a disturbance of reality. Motion is the baseline. Everything else is approximation. That's where the real story begins. Spin appears, the moment things form. Now that we've killed the idea of stillness, let's deal with something even more unsettling. Motion doesn't just exist. It organizes itself. Whenever matter gathers, whenever something forms, instead of remaining a loose cloud, rotation shows up immediately, not later, not as a side effect, right at the beginning. This surprises people because they imagine spin as something added from the outside, as if the universe starts calm and then gets twisted by accident. That picture is wrong. Let's take something concrete. A cloud of gas in space, enormous, cold, spread out, no obvious rotation worth talking about, just particles drifting around. Gravity pulls the cloud inward. As it collapses, you might expect everything to fall straight toward the center like rain falling vertically. That never happens. The cloud begins to rotate, slowly at first, then faster, then violently. It flattens into a disk. From that disk, stars ignite. Around those stars, planets form. Around those planets, moons appear. And all of them spin. People ask, what started the rotation? That question assumes something needs to start it. It doesn't. The cloud was never perfectly balanced to begin with. Absolute symmetry is a fantasy. There's always a tiny imbalance, a slight sideways motion, a minuscule deviation. And here's the key point. The universe remembers that deviation forever. Angular momentum is conserved. That means once rotation exists, it cannot simply vanish. You can spread it out. You can redistribute it. You can hide it in smaller motions, but you cannot erase it. As the cloud collapses, its size shrinks. The same amount of angular momentum is now confined to a smaller region, so the rotation speeds up. No mystery, no drama, just bookkeeping. The universe is obsessive about bookkeeping. This is the same reason a figure skater spins faster when they pull their arms in. Nothing new was added. Nothing magical happened. The same rotation was squeezed into a smaller space. And this happens everywhere. Galaxies rotate, not because something kicked them, but because matter falling inward cannot help but twist. Storms rotate for the same reason. Water spirals down a drain for the same reason. Accretion disks around black holes glow and whirl for the same reason. Formation and rotation are inseparable. If something is forming, it is spinning. If it is not spinning, it is not truly forming. Now here's where people get uncomfortable. They want to believe the universe could have turned out differently, that maybe if initial conditions were just right, rotation wouldn't exist. That's wishful thinking. Perfect non-rotation would require infinite precision. Every particle would have to cancel every other particle's motion exactly. One atom drifting slightly off would ruin it. And nature does not do infinite precision. The universe is sloppy in the most productive way possible. So spin isn't a special feature of certain objects. It's what happens when matter is allowed to organize itself without being micromanaged by fantasy-level symmetry. And once spin appears, it doesn't just sit there politely. It reshapes everything. Rotation creates flattening. Flattening creates structure. Structure creates gradients. Gradients create energy flow. Without spin, gravity would simply crush things into featureless lumps. No disks, no rings, no separation into systems, just collapse and stagnation. Spin prevents that. It resists collapse in some directions while allowing it in others. It creates balance without stillness, stability without freezing. That's a profound idea, and most people miss it. We're taught to think stability means stopping motion. In reality, stability is motion arranged just right, so nothing flies apart. The universe doesn't stabilize things by calming them down. It stabilizes them by making them rotate. And notice something else. The same law applies whether you're talking about galaxies or electrons. Scale doesn't matter. The rule survives. Whenever something comes into being, rotation appears because motion has nowhere else to go. You might think of spin as a nuisance, something complicating the equations. Physicists learn the opposite lesson. Spin simplifies reality. It allows energy to be stored without exploding. It allows matter to exist without collapsing. It allows systems to persist instead of annihilating themselves. So when you see rotation everywhere, don't think of it as chaos. Think of it as the universe is compromised. It cannot allow perfect stillness. It cannot allow perfect collapse. So it spins. And here's the part that should really bother you. This means spin is not evidence of a turbulent universe. It is evidence of a universe that works. Rotation is what reality looks like when it's functioning normally. If you ever did find a region of the universe with no rotation at any level, no angular momentum anywhere, no spin hiding in particles or fields, that would not be a peaceful place. That would be a dead place. But you won't find it, because the moment something exists long enough to matter, it starts turning. And once it turns, the universe refuses to forget it ever did. That's not poetry. That's conservation law. And conservation laws are the closest thing physics has to commandments. Nothing forms without spinning. That's not a tendency. It's a rule. 3 even fundamental particles spin. Up to now, you could still rescue your intuition if you wanted to. You could say, all right, big things spin because gravity pulls unevenly. Fine. I can picture that. Now that picture is going to fail you completely, because spin does not belong only to stars, planets, storms, or galaxies. Electrons spin. Protons spin. Neutrons spin. And here's the uncomfortable part. They do this even though they are not little balls rotating in space. If you imagine an electron as a tiny sphere spinning like a top, you get nonsense immediately. The surface would have to move faster than light. The energy would be infinite. The whole idea collapses. So physicists tried to drop the word spin. They couldn't. Because when you measure electrons, they behave exactly as if they have angular momentum. They create magnetic fields. They respond to rotation-sensitive experiments. They split into discrete orientations when passed through magnetic gradients. This is not analogy. This is measurement. Spin is there whether you like the picture or not. So what is spinning? That's the wrong question. Spin at the quantum level is not about something physically rotating in space. It is about how a particle exists in relation to the structure of reality itself. Spin is not motion through space. Spin is motion within the rules. It is a built-in degree of freedom, a way for nature to encode information, orientation, and behavior. And it comes in exact, discrete amounts. Not any value. Not a smooth range. Fixed options. Nature doesn't let particles choose how much they spin. it assigns it, which should immediately tell you something important. Spin is not accidental. It is fundamental. In fact, if you list the properties that define a particle, mass, charge, spin sits right there at the same level. Remove it, and the particle stops behaving like itself. This is where people usually protest. They say, fine, but that's just a mathematical trick. It's not real spinning. That objection misunderstands what physics does. Physics does not care what pictures make you comfortable. It cares what predicts reality correctly. And spin predicts reality perfectly. Remove spin from the equations, and atoms collapse. Chemistry breaks. Matter becomes unstable. The periodic table ceases to make sense. Spin is not decoration added later. It is part of the scaffolding. Even more unsettling, spin is tied to statistics. Whether particles can occupy the same state or must avoid each other depends entirely on their spin. Electrons, because of their spin, refuse to sit on top of each other. This single fact is why matter has volume, why solids resist compression, why you don't fall through the floor. Your chair exists because electrons spin. That is not poetic exaggeration. That is literal causation. And it gets stranger. Spin is linked to rotation in space-time itself. Rotate a quantum particle 360 degrees and it may not return to the same state. Some particles require a full 720-degree rotation to come back to where they started. Try to picture that. You can't, but experiments confirm it. Reality is not obligated to match your spatial intuition. So now we have a situation that should deeply bother you if you're paying attention. Rotation exists where there is no classical object. Spin exists without spinning matter. Angular momentum exists without rotating shapes, which means spin is more primitive than objects. Objects inherit spin. Spin does not inherit objects. This flips the usual story completely. We tend to think things exist first, and then they move. At the deepest level, motion is already there. Existence comes later. Particles are not tiny marbles that spin. They are patterns of activity that include spin as part of their identity. You could say carefully that the universe does not place spin into particles. The universe builds particles out of spin. And once you accept that, a lot of confusion disappears. Why does everything rotate? Because rotation is already present before everything shows up. Why does motion never stop? Because stopping would require removing a property that defines existence itself. Stillness would not just be rare at the quantum level. It would be meaningless. A particle with no spin, no fluctuation, no internal motion would not be a particle at all. It would be nothing. So when people say, why does the universe spin so much? They are asking the question backward. The better question is, why does the universe bother forming things at all when spin is already doing all the work? And the answer is that structures are just organized expressions of this deeper motion. Spin is not a behavior layered on top of matter. Spin is matter admitting that it cannot escape motion, even in principle. At the smallest scale we can probe, rotation is not something that happens. It is something that must happen. And once you understand that, the spinning of galaxies no longer looks dramatic. It looks inevitable. Because the universe was rotating long before it had anything big enough for you to notice. For motion is the cheapest state of the universe. People like to think the universe prefers balance, calm, and rest. That it wants to settle down, smooth itself out, and stop changing if only we would leave it alone. That idea comes from human fatigue, not physics. We get tired. The universe doesn't. In physics, rest is not free. It's expensive. It requires conditions to be perfectly arranged and continuously maintained. Motion, on the other hand, happens automatically unless something actively prevents it. This already contradicts common sense, so let's go slowly. Imagine trying to make something perfectly still. Not pretty still, not looks still, actually still, you would have to eliminate every vibration, every thermal fluctuation, every quantum uncertainty, every interaction with the environment. You would have to cancel motions in all directions, at all scales, simultaneously. That is not a passive situation. That is constant labor. Stillness is a balancing act that must be performed forever. The moment you stop enforcing it, motion returns. Motion doesn't need supervision. Stillness does. This is why nature almost never chooses perfect symmetry or perfect equilibrium. Those states are fragile. One tiny deviation ruins them. The universe prefers states that survive small mistakes. Motion survives mistakes beautifully. Take energy. Energy can exist in many forms, but one of the easiest ways to store it is in motion. Rotation, in particular, is incredibly efficient. You can hide a lot of energy in spin without things flying apart. A rotating system doesn't need fine-tuning to persist. It keeps going simply because nothing tells it to stop. This is why conservation laws matter so much. Momentum and angular momentum don't fade away. They are not slowly drained by time. If they change, it's because something else took them. In other words, the universe is stingy. It doesn't waste motion. Now here's the uncomfortable part. When people imagine the universe at rest, they imagine it as simple, clean, orderly. In reality, a perfectly still universe would be unimaginably complex to maintain. Every degree of freedom would need to be pinned down, every possibility eliminated. That kind of control does not exist in nature. What exists is allowance. The universe allows things to move. It allows imbalance. It allows drift. It allows rotation. And because it allows these things, it doesn't have to work very hard. Motion is the path of least resistance. This is why, when systems form, they almost never settle into static arrangements. They oscillate, they circulate, they rotate, they exchange energy. Look at atoms. Electrons do not sit motionless because that would require exact confinement. Instead, they occupy dynamic states. They smear out, they fluctuate. They move in ways that minimize energy while preserving uncertainty. Look at planets. A planet at rest relative to its star would fall straight in. That's not stable. Orbiting motion, however, creates a long-lasting arrangement that requires no constant correction. Look at galaxies. Rotation prevents collapse. It distributes matter. It creates longevity. The universe does not seek stillness. It seeks persistence. And persistence favors motion. Now let's make this even more uncomfortable. Entropy, the tendency for systems to explore more possible states, doesn't mean everything slows down and freezes. It means systems spread energy around. They mix. They circulate. They move. Even equilibrium is dynamic. It is not the absence of motion. It is motion balanced against motion. A gas in equilibrium does not stop moving. It moves in every possible way equally. Stillness is not the natural end of things. It is a fiction produced by averaging. So when you imagine the universe settling, you are projecting a human desire for rest onto a system that has no such preference. The universe does not get tired of moving. It does not seek a final pose. It doesn't care about completion. Motion is simply easier. And because motion is easier, it is everywhere. Rotation, in particular, is cheap. It stores energy without requiring alignment. It persists without constant input. It resists decay. This is why spin shows up at every level of reality, from electrons to galaxies. Not because the universe is energetic, but because the universe is efficient. The most unsettling realization is this: if you somehow forced the universe into perfect stillness, you would not create peace. You would create an impossible state that could not survive the slightest disturbance. Reality chooses motion because motion forgives imperfection. Stillness demands perfection. And perfection is something the universe has absolutely no interest in maintaining. So nothing stays still, not because the universe is restless, but because rest is an unnatural luxury. Motion is cheaper, and the universe always pays the lowest price. 5 spin creates structure, not chaos. Most people associate motion with disorder. They imagine stillness as order and movement as mess. A calm room feels organized. A spinning storm feels dangerous. So they assume the universe would be more orderly if things would just stop moving. That intuition is backwards. Spin is not what destroys structure. Spin is what makes structure possible in the first place. Let's start with gravity, because gravity by itself is brutally simple. Gravity pulls things straight inward. No finesse, no creativity, just collapse. If gravity were allowed to act alone, without rotation, matter would fall directly into dense, featureless clumps. No disks, no layers, no separation, just piles. That universe would be boring and short-lived. Rotation changes everything. The moment a collapsing system has even a trace of angular momentum, collapse can no longer happen equally in all directions. Matter starts to resist in some directions while yielding in others. That resistance creates shape. Instead of falling straight inward, material spreads out into disks. Instead of uniform clumps, you get rings, spirals, layers, gradients. Stars form because rotating gas can shed energy without losing all its structure. Planets form because disks allow matter to separate and organize. Solar systems exist because spin prevents everything from crashing into the center at once. Without rotation, gravity is destructive. With rotation, gravity becomes constructive. This is not an exaggeration. If angular momentum were somehow removed from a forming star system, planets would never appear. The star would swallow everything before structure had time to emerge. Spin slows collapse, just enough to let complexity grow. Now take this idea down to smaller scales. Atoms are stable, not because forces cancel perfectly, but because dynamic motion creates balance. Electrons don't sit motionless waiting to fall into the nucleus. Their motion, governed by quantum rules, creates standing patterns that hold the atom together. Remove that motion, and the atom ceases to exist as an atom. At larger scales, the same principle repeats. Galaxies are not static collections of stars. They are rotating systems where motion organizes matter into arms, bulges, halos. The spiral shape is not decoration. It's a record of rotation distributing mass over time. Even hurricanes follow this rule. Without rotation, warm air would rise and collapse chaotically. Rotation organizes the flow, creating a stable structure that can persist for days. Spin doesn't randomize systems. It channels them. It takes raw energy and gives it direction. Here's the key mistake people make. They confuse stillness with order. Stillness is not order. Stillness is absence. Order, in physics, usually means patterns that persist despite constant motion. And spin is one of the most reliable ways to create that persistence. A spinning system can absorb disturbances. It can redistribute energy. It can survive shocks without falling apart. A non-spinning system cannot. That's why rotation shows up wherever long-lived structures exist. And it's why the universe looks the way it does. Now notice something important. Spin does not eliminate chaos. It uses it. Small irregularities in rotation get stretched, amplified, and organized into large-scale features. Tiny asymmetries become planets. Slight density variations become stars. Minor fluctuations become entire galaxies. Spin takes imperfection and turns it into architecture. That's not poetic language. That's how instabilities work in rotating systems. This is why the universe is not smooth and uniform. It's textured, layered, hierarchical. Rotation allows systems to explore possibilities without destroying themselves, and that has consequences far beyond astronomy. Life itself depends on this principle. Biological systems are not static. They circulate energy, blood flows, signals oscillate. Metabolism is rotation and exchange at the molecular level. A perfectly still organism would be dead. Structure requires motion, and stable structure requires organized motion. Spin is the simplest form of that organization. So when people imagine a calmer universe as a more ordered one, they're wrong at the deepest level. A universe without spin would not be peaceful. It would be sterile. No stars that live long enough. No planets that separate cleanly. No chemistry rich enough for complexity. No life. Spin is not a complication added to an otherwise neat universe. Spin is the reason the universe is interesting at all. And once you see that, the constant rotation everywhere stops looking like noise. It starts looking like design, not intentional design, but physical necessity. The universe doesn't build with blueprints. It builds with motion. And spin is the tool that lets matter become something instead of nothing. 6. You are not outside the rotation. Up to now, it's been easy to talk about stars, galaxies, electrons, distant things, abstract things, things you can point at and say, that's physics. Now remove the distance. You are not watching a spinning universe from the outside. You are happening inside it. And not in a poetic sense, in a literal, physical one. Start with the obvious. You are standing on a planet rotating at roughly 1,000 miles per hour at the equator. You don't feel it because motion at constant speed does not announce itself. Only changes in motion do. That fact alone should already disturb you. Your intuition about motion is terrible. You mistake smooth motion for rest. Now zoom out. The planet is orbiting a star. The star is orbiting the center of a galaxy. The galaxy is moving relative to other galaxies. Space itself is expanding. There is no reference frame where everything stops. But let's get closer instead of farther. Your body is not a solid object. It is a controlled storm. Your heart beats by circulating blood. Your lungs exchange gases through rhythmic motion. Your cells constantly transport molecules along rotating proteins and folding structures. Even the molecules themselves are not static. Proteins vibrate, twist, and change shape in order to function. DNA is not a rigid ladder. It coils, uncoils, and spins as it is read and copied. Life is rotation constrained just tightly enough not to fall apart. Now look at your brain. Your thoughts are not stored objects. They are patterns of electrical activity, oscillations, feedback loops, signals circulating through networks. A thought exists only while motion sustains it. The moment that motion stops, the thought vanishes. Memory, emotion, identity, all of it depends on continuous dynamic processes. Nothing about you is frozen except in your imagination. And this is where people resist. They want to believe there is a self underneath all this motion. Something still, something permanent, something that stays the same while everything else changes. Physics has no use for that idea. What you call you is a stable pattern created by constant motion, like a whirlpool in a river. The shape persists, but the water is never the same. Remove the flow, and the structure disappears. So when you ask why everything spins, you're also asking why you exist as something rather than nothing. Because existence, as far as physics can tell, is not static. It is sustained activity. Even your sense of time is tied to motion. Clocks work by oscillation. Atoms measure time by transitions. Biological rhythms track time by cycles. Time does not tick in a still universe. It emerges from motion. This means something uncomfortable but important. You don't experience motion as motion. You experience it as normality. You call it rest because you're embedded in it. A fish doesn't feel the water. You don't feel the rotation. But that doesn't mean it isn't there. And once you see this clearly, a lot of confusion disappears. The universe is not moving around you. You are one of the ways it moves. Your life is not a pause in cosmic activity. It is a continuation of it at a particular scale. Your stability is not the absence of motion. It is motion arranged in a way that persists. This is why trying to imagine absolute rest feels comforting but false. It's an attempt to step outside reality itself. There is no outside. There is no still vantage point. There is only motion layered upon motion, organizing itself into stars, cells, thoughts, and questions like this one. And here's the final twist. The same laws that force electrons to spin and galaxies to rotate also govern you. Not metaphorically, literally. You are not exempt. You are not special in that sense. You are a beautifully constrained rotation that happens to be aware of itself. And that awareness, your ability to ask why things spin, is just another loop in the same ongoing motion. The universe didn't stop to create you. It passed through you. And it's still moving. 7. Nothing stays still because nothing is finished. People secretly believe the universe is on its way somewhere, toward rest, toward balance, toward a final quiet state where everything settles and stops changing. That belief is not scientific. It's psychological. It comes from how human projects work. We start things, we finish them. We rest. So we project that story onto reality itself. Physics tells a very different story. The universe is not a project. It has no finish line, no final pose, no moment where it can say, that's done. Stillness would mean completion. And completion is not something the laws of nature ever aim for. Look carefully at what motion actually does. Motion keeps options open. Rotation stores energy without resolving it. Oscillation delays collapse. Circulation prevents final outcomes. Spin is the universe refusing to pick an ending. Every rotating system is energy that has not decided what to become yet. That's why motion persists. That's why nothing locks into place permanently. Even when systems reach equilibrium, they do so dynamically. Energy still flows. Particles still move. Fields still fluctuate. The appearance of calm is produced by balance, not by cessation. A truly still system would be a dead one, not metaphorically, but physically. No interactions, no exchanges, no transitions, no time. Time itself depends on change. If nothing moved, there would be no before or after. No clocks could tick, no process could unfold. Stillness would not just end motion. It would end meaning. So the universe avoids it, not consciously, not deliberately, but inevitably. The laws that govern reality are written in such a way that motion is always allowed and never fully eliminated. Energy can transform, but it cannot disappear. Momentum can shift, but it cannot be erased. Rotation, especially, is stubborn. It resists resolution. It keeps systems from collapsing into final states too quickly. This is why stars burn for billions of years instead of collapsing instantly. Why galaxies endure. Why atoms persist. Why you persist. Spin stretches existence across time. Now here's the part most people don't want to hear. The universe does not owe you permanence. Everything you see as stable is only stable because motion is continuously sustaining it. The moment that sustaining motion fails, the structure dissolves. There is no final holding still that guarantees survival. There is only ongoing activity, and this applies to everything, from galaxies to identities. People talk about finding stillness in life. What they usually mean is finding patterns of motion they can live with. Predictable rhythms, manageable cycles. True stillness would be annihilation. That's not a threat. That's a definition. Nothing stays still, because staying still would mean stopping the processes that allow existence to continue. The universe doesn't rush toward rest, because rest is not a goal state. It is an absence state. And absence doesn't evolve. So instead, reality keeps turning. It spins matter into structures. It spins energy into pattern. It spins time forward without asking permission. Not because it's unfinished in a sloppy sense, but because being unfinished is what allows anything to exist at all. The universe is not incomplete by accident. It is incomplete by design, not intentional design, but structural necessity. Completion would be silence. And silence, at the fundamental level, would mean nothing happens. So nothing ever stays still. Not because the universe is chaotic, not because it's restless, not because it's broken, but because motion is the only way existence avoids ending itself. Spin is not a phase the universe will grow out of. It is the condition that makes universe possible in the first place. And when you finally see that, the question changes. You stop asking why everything spins. And you start realizing that if it ever didn't, there would be nothing left to ask questions at all. So when you ask why everything in the universe is spinning, you're really asking why the universe is allowed to exist at all. Stillness would mean resolution. Resolution would mean no motion. No motion would mean no time, no structure, no experience. Spin is not noise layered on top of reality. It is the signature of existence, refusing to end. Atoms turn because they must. Stars rotate because they cannot stop. Galaxies spiral because collapse alone would erase them. And you move, think, age, and change for the same reason. Nothing stays still because nothing is meant to be finished. The universe is not searching for rest. It is sustaining itself through motion. Everything is spinning, not randomly, not temporarily, but because spin is what keeps reality alive.